Hello, glad to see you on my channel. I really value it. And today I want to share with you a wonderful story. It's a dramatic story that will come as a total shock to everybody. It is a really amazing story. So enjoy watching it. Mary carefully rolled the wheelchair with Helga in it out of the rehabilitation clinic. This was not the first time they had come here to be examined and to find out the verdict of the doctors. And they unanimously said that the patient needed an operation for a complete cure, but it cost so much money that they would not be able to collect in a lifetime. Helga rode in the wheelchair with her head drooping. She was thinking about how to go on living, how to get back on her feet and walk normally again, as before. The girl had no hope for anything. Tears came to her eyes as if by themselves, and she reached into her pocket for a kerchief. Hearing her sobbing, Mary stopped the stroller and tried to reassure her. "Pull yourself together. We'll figure something out, and you'll walk again. And you'll walk again." Helga responded with a detached nod of her head and continued to cry. No one could comfort her at that moment. Not even her friend's words helped, even though they had grown up together in the same orphanage. True, they got there 2 years apart. Mary was already within the walls of the institution when Helga was brought in. The girl was very frightened, and on the rights of the head girl, Mary took her under her patronage. So they became friends and never parted again, no matter what happened between them. They always found a compromise. But in this particular case, Mary didn't know what to do. On the one hand, she really wanted to help her friend, but on the other, she had no such opportunities. Both were orphans and had no wealthy relatives. At the same time, they had graduated high school with honors and had been accepted to medical school. After graduation, they became nurses and were hired at the city hospital. Had it not been for that accident, Helga would not be in for that accident. Helga would not be in a wheelchair right now. It all happened a year ago, when she accidentally met an attractive guy named Max. He was the son of a banker, and you could say he also ran a small financial institution. He was brought to the hospital with suspected appendicitis. Naturally, such a patient was placed in the VIP ward, and one of the nurses who was supposed to look after him and help him was Helga. She had the chance to be close to a wealthy major. Mary, however, said that she should not count on anything. However, her friend was not hindered by her warnings. She literally fell in love with the patient. Max charmed the girl with his appearance, as well as the manner of communication. He could find common topics of conversation, and thus shone with erudition. Helga liked it when a guy was smart and had something to discuss. So they began a love affair that soon grew into a serious relationship. Immediately after the operation, after the allotted time, Max was safely discharged. He did not want to stay in the hospital for long because he had business to attend to at the bank. His father rushed him. He needed results, not just promises. Max suggested that Ola keep seeing each other so that eventually we could get married. He was straightforward about it and didn't shy away from it. Helga supported him and said yes, especially since she also wanted to get married as soon as possible. At the same time, Max grew up in a wealthy family, and it was a tradition that any festive event was always celebrated in grand style. The young banker told Helga this. "Just imagine how many famous guests there will be." With a furrowed brow, the girl replied, "I thought it would be a low-key affair with people close to me." It's just that there are a lot of people close to me. She reacted to the proposal to celebrate the wedding on a grand scale, because that's basically what they were going for. Helga looked after the car and cried. She remembered their romantic candlelit evenings together. At such moments, Max was simply charming. He had an elegant, special way of giving flowers and making expensive presents. It seemed that they had been living together for a long time, but decided to diversify their relations by going to restaurants. Helga still couldn't forget the melodic music that was playing there. Max specially ordered exactly those songs that she liked the most. A bottle of expensive wine, a vase of fruit, and mountains of real chocolate were obligatory on the table. Max was not stingy, but Olia's inner feelings were not noticed at all. Remembering her childhood and how hard it was for her, she could not calmly watch how her boyfriend easily spent money, but she also did not dare to tell him about it. They were not yet husband and wife to do household chores together. Although Max had told practically everyone that Helga was his fiancée and they were getting married soon, he hadn't considered the main thing. How would his parents react? They first saw the bride when their son brought her home to meet her. Max's mother immediately determined that she was a poor man and behaved accordingly. When they all sat down to dinner together, Helga was given only one cutlery, a spoon, although there were several different dishes in front of her. Looking at the table setting, the girl realized high society is not for her. Max's parents did not seem to consider her a bride. At the same time, the boy's mother noted Helga's beautiful appearance. The girl had lush hair the color of a ripe chestnut, and her eyes, though sad, were bright gray. However, Helga never took advantage of this and behaved more than modestly. She believed that one should love a man for his character and attitude. Max was in complete agreement with her. That is why he did not embellish anything. On the contrary, he only emphasized Helga's natural beauty in front of his parents. Left alone when the son took his bride home, the parents decided to discuss his act among themselves. And first, of course, the mother began. "I can't even imagine how we will look at our business partners when my son showed her to everyone. I can't imagine how he could have chosen that girl either," her husband echoed, nervously rubbing the collar of his snow-white shirt. "You don't have to correct him. He's already starched." Anne became angry and admonished her husband. "You'd better think of what to do with the bride, to I don't know. But if we now start to put a stick in the wheels, our son may do things that we will not be able to recover from then," he said, leaving alone his collar. "You're right. Our hands are tied. We have no freedom of action," Anne pointed out. The parents couldn't afford to make any sudden moves. They still remembered how they had once forbidden their son to go abroad, but he did it anyway. True, he disappeared for 10 days. Then the whole family searched for him. All the telephones were cut off until they found her son. It turned out that he was resting quietly in a nearby hotel, and at the same time lucrative deals were about to be struck. The father barely got out of it, but it cost him a lot of money. It was after that incident that he and his wife stopped pressuring their son, and everything went back to normal. Max felt confident and business with the bank was moving in the right direction for everyone. That's why the parents decided to postpone the serious heart. To heart talk for a while, to observe their son and his fiancée. They were interested in how far they could go in their relationship. Of course, marriage was out of the question, but right now they wanted to stop everything. These last words hurt Helga. She took her fiancé's hand from her waist and stepped aside, not understanding what had happened. The young man cautiously asked what she was offended about. However, she didn't say anything to him and asked her to leave her alone. Max got into his car and drove away. He did not like the way his girlfriend reacted to the proposal to celebrate the wedding on a grand scale, because that's basically what they were going for. Helga looked after the car and cried. She remembered their romantic candlelit evenings together. At such moments, Max was simply charming. He had an elegant, special way of giving flowers and making expensive presents. It seemed that they had been living together for a long time, but decided to diversify their relations by going to restaurants. Helga still couldn't forget the melodic music that was playing there. Max specially ordered exactly those songs that she liked the most. A bottle of expensive wine, a vase of fruit, and mountains of real chocolate were obligatory on the table. Max was not stingy, but Olia's inner feelings were not noticed at all. Remembering her childhood and how hard it was for her, she could not calmly watch how her boyfriend easily spent money, but she also did not dare to tell him about it. They were not yet husband and wife to do household chores together. Although Max had told practically everyone that Helga was his fiancée and they were getting married soon, he hadn't considered the main thing. How would his parents react? They first saw the bride when their son brought her home to meet her. Max's mother immediately determined that she was a poor man and behaved accordingly. When they all sat down to dinner together, Helga was given only one cutlery, a spoon, although there were several different dishes in front of her. Looking at the table setting, the girl realized high society is not for her. Max's parents did not seem to consider her a bride. At the same time, the boy's mother noted Helga's beautiful appearance. The girl had lush hair the color of a ripe chestnut, and her eyes, though sad, were bright gray. However, Helga never took advantage of this and behaved more than modestly. She believed that one should love a man for his character and attitude. Max was in complete agreement with her. That is why he did not embellish anything. On the contrary, he only emphasized Helga's natural beauty in front of his parents. Left alone when the son took his bride home, the parents decided to discuss his act among themselves. And first, of course, the mother began. "I can't even imagine how we will look at our business partners when my son showed her to everyone." "I can't imagine how he could have chosen that girl either," her husband echoed, nervously rubbing the collar of his snow-white shirt. "You don't have to correct him, he's already starched." Anne became angry and admonished her husband. "You'd better think of what to do with the bride. To be, I don't know. But if we now start to put a stick in the wheels, our son may do things that we will not be able to recover from then," said, leaving alone his collar. "You're right. Our hands are tied. We have no freedom of action," Anne pointed out. The parents couldn't afford to make any sudden moves. They still remembered how they had once forbidden their son to go abroad, but he did it anyway. True, he disappeared for 10 days. Then the whole family searched for him. All the telephones were cut off until they found her son. It turned out that he was resting quietly in a nearby hotel, and at the same time, lucrative deals were about to be struck. The father barely got out of it, but it cost him a lot of money. It was after that incident that he and his wife stopped pressuring their son, and everything went back to normal. Max felt confident, and business with the bank was moving in the right direction for everyone. That's why the parents decided to postpone the serious heart talk for a while, to observe their son and his fiancée. They were interested in how far they could go in their relationship. Of course, marriage was out of the question, but right now they wanted to stop everything. Was not possible. In the meantime, Max began to stay at Helga's house more often. She lived with Mary in a small 2-room apartment on the outskirts of the city. Initially, they had separate apartments, which the girls received from the state, but then they decided to combine them to be always near and help each other. Max found an approach to Mary, and for a small fee, she sometimes left the loving couple alone. They did not have enough time to enjoy each other. Helga gave all of herself, showing how much she loved him. Max, too, did not hold back his emotions and showered her not only with compliments, but also with tender caresses. Hardly anyone thought about the fact that something could not work out between them. Love had pushed aside vigilance and caution. At any rate, she had stopped soberly assessing the situation, though she had never allowed herself to relax, having learned in the orphanage to see right through people. It wasn't Max who wasn't hiding anything from her. The danger might have come from his parents. They had behaved with undisguised contempt when they had met. Helga then saw the hatred in their eyes that read, "Oh, the beggar wants to take our favorite boy." Especially the contempt came from the mother, while the father was silent, condemning his son's choice with a mute reproach, and he was quite good at expressing his own opinion without words. All this Helga noticed at once, but decided it was up to the boy to choose. She could only hope that he wouldn't back down. At least she did not hear a note of doubt in her conversations with him. On the contrary, Max was completely confident that things would work out between them, and he set her up in a positive way so she wouldn't have to worry about anything. At the same time, there was still some sense of a catch. One day, Max invited Olia out of town. Their family estate was there. Her parents didn't visit it very often, but her son did when he needed to spend time in solitude. After eating something from the road, the boy and the girl went for a walk in the park. It, too, was created specifically to be closer to nature. After a couple of laps around an artificial pond, they suddenly stopped. Max took a box in velvet fabric out of his pocket and opened it in front of Helga. Inside was an engagement ring with an expensive stone. Looking at it, Helga could not contain her surprise. "What is it?" "Well, what is it?" With excitement, Max answered. "It is an official proposal of marriage." "But we are already together," Helga said embarrassedly. Of course I'm happy to have met you," Max continued. "It's just that we've talked so much about getting married and I haven't proposed to you officially. I think it's about time." "Will you marry me?" Tears of joy rolled from Helga's eyes. She didn't even try to wipe them away, afraid not for her eyelashes, but for the fact that this could just be a dream, and if she woke up now, it would all be gone. Closing her eyes for a moment and then opening them abruptly, she pinched her cheek. Nothing had happened. Max, as he stood on one knee, holding the box with the ring in his hands, and continued to stand, only his eyes somehow strangely rounded. "I agree to be your wife." Taking her hand, he put the ring on her, and then, standing on the ground, he hugged her tightly and kissed her. But the embrace was so strong that Helga almost suffocated. She loosened her grip on Max and looked into his eyes. "Are you sure of your choice?" The question sounded as if Helga was looking for a drop of doubt in him. "Absolutely. I just don't understand why you asked that," the boy answered. "It is about your parents," Helga said. "I am not blind. I saw how they accepted me." "What on earth were you thinking of?" With his hands in the air, Max pleaded. "I make my own decisions and I don't care what my parents think of you." "What if they don't want us to get married?" Helga asked again. "Well, that's their problem then," Max answered calmly. "Let's stop spoiling each other's moods. I didn't bring you here to discuss my parents." "I'm sorry, my love. It's just that I'm very worried." "You should worry about what dress you're going to wear to the wedding," he said with a smile. "By the way, I have looked at several variants on the internet. I think you will like them." "The main thing is that you like them," said Helga, showering passionate kisses on her boyfriend. They did not discuss his parents anymore that day, and it was clear that Max was making his own decision. He hadn't just brought her to the house. She had learned from him that this was where they were to live after the wedding. Max wanted to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city, and of course away from her parents, to keep them out of their lives. In any case, from his words, they would not bother, knowing that the child was doing well. Besides, Max was pretty sure that the mother and father wouldn't go to the house unless it was absolutely necessary. The boy had set the date of the wedding as the day on which his bank management anniversary was to be celebrated. In fact, that meant they still had 2 months ahead of them. Helga agreed to the date, especially since they had nowhere to hurry anyway. After Max so elegantly proposed, there was no longer any doubt that he would marry her. Even a friend said that the groom seemed to be completely ready for a family. From that moment on, the new groom stopped listening to his parents at all. They tried, of course, to talk him out of his hasty decisions, but he put up a barrier and forced his mother and father to back down. Helga could not believe that he had acted so boldly and confidently toward his intended goal. Nothing seemed to stand in their way. At any rate, there were no preconditions for it. The tragedy that put an end to Helga's dreams had occurred 2 weeks before the wedding. They were returning from a country house at the time. The guy had been drinking a little before the road, but assured his beloved that he could drive the car. It was drizzling outside, and the driver switched on the wipers every now and then. He tried to keep his eyes on the road, warding off the approaching drowsiness. Helga sat behind and could not see that her lover was almost asleep. Suddenly the car swerved on the wet, rain-soaked road, and he lost control. The driver chaotically clung to the steering wheel, shouting obscene words, but it was too late. The car was under the wheels of a truck. By some miracle, Max managed to turn the steering wheel, and at that moment their car crashed straight into the ditch. The hardest impact came on the side where Helga was sitting. She did not even feel anything crunch. The girl went into a stupor from the shock. The rescuers who arrived at the scene of the accident had a lot of trouble getting her out of the car, which could not be said about Maxie. He got out of the wrecked car on his own. The medic stated he had several bruises and abrasions, but Helga was rushed to the hospital. Refusing treatment, Max followed his beloved. He found the doctor's office and opened the door without knocking. "Sorry to be so sudden, but I would like to know what happened to the patient who was admitted after the accident. She is in intensive care. She has a compression fracture of the spine in the lumbar region." The doctor answered. "What does that mean?" Max continued his questioning. "It's hard to judge yet. Further examination and treatment will show everything," the doctor said languidly and uncertainly. "Let's hope that modern medicine will help us, and we will get her back on her feet." "You mean she will walk?" Max did not resign. "Time will tell. In the meantime, you can visit her so she does not fall into depression," advised the doctor. "Didn't you tell her about the broken spine?" She was in a state of shock. "After the sedative injections, she fell asleep," the doctor replied. "But you can talk to her tonight. I'll make the necessary arrangements, and you will be admitted." "Yes, thank you. Besides, we were going to get married," Max said with sadness in his voice. "Why so gloomy?" The doctor cheered him up. "I am sure that the wedding will take place." An hour later, Max was at his parents' apartment. Upon learning what had happened, Anne almost fainted. "Son, how did you manage to get behind the wheel while drunk?" "Calm down, there's nothing wrong with me." "What about the police? How did they let you go?" With tears in her eyes, she asked. "Money does everything. Wouldn't you know?" the son answered. "I paid whom I had to. In general, the incident was hushed up, and they promised that they would solve the passenger issue themselves." "What passenger, son?" My father intervened in the conversation. "I mean, I'm not influential enough to get you out of criminal responsibility. Is he dead?" "No, he's not dead," Max answered calmly. "And it wasn't him, it was her. I was riding with Helga." "I don't understand. Where is she then?" asked the mother. "In the hospital. She has a fracture of the spine in the lumbar region," Max said, almost syllable by syllable. "God, so now she's..." Anne said, slightly covering her mouth in amazement. "It's all right. The doctor said that the medicine is at its best now and she will be back on her feet soon," Max answered with his hands in the air. "Well, well," his father muttered with a furrowed brow. Max was so confident that his beloved would recover that he simply did not pay attention to his father's irony. As for the mother, she was understandable. She was worried about the accident that nearly killed her only son. Refusing dinner, Max arrived at the hospital in the evening. A nurse looked at his papers and let him into the IQ. Although it was strictly forbidden, they made an exception for him. Helga had regained some consciousness by then. She opened her eyes, and seeing Max in front of her, smiled demurely. Being under the drugs, the girl still felt no pain. Gently taking her hand, Max whispered, "I talked to the doctor, and he said he'll have you back on your feet soon." "What's wrong with them?" Helga asked excitedly, her free hand touching her thighs. Don't worry. They're still there, Max answered, pulling her hands back. You have a fracture of the lumbar spine. What kind of fracture? Helga asked with bewilderment. I'm not a doctor. I don't know all these terms, he shrugged. Don't you know about it? No, I don't even remember being brought here. Helga sobbed. I just got out of the injections an hour ago. That's strange. I thought you'd been informed of everything, said Max, looking thoughtful. But hang in there, doctor. He promised to cure you. Thank you for your support, replied Helga. At the same time, she realized that her future family life was in question. She knew from medical courses that with such a fracture, recovery of motor functions is extremely slow, and it is not certain that the person will be able to walk again. It turned out that she was at risk of disability. True, she hoped that a miracle would happen, so she did not tell her fiancé the whole truth. The treatment, as the girl anticipated, was almost inconclusive. The doctors did everything they could, but her legs remained immobile. She was given a wheelchair to facilitate her movement around the ward. In the meantime, Max started coming in less and less often. Helga called him, and he kept saying that he had a lot of work to do. Inwardly, she convinced herself that this was the case, but her heart told her that her lover had fallen out of love with her. And in fact, it soon turned out to be true. And while Anne, taking advantage of the moment, brainwashed her son, she almost every day when he came home from work, hammered into him that with Helga to break up. But understand, son, you don't need her, Miss Anne kept telling him. What the doctor said about a cure was nothing. He's not a wizard, and he can't put her back on her feet with a wave of his wand. Maybe you're wrong, Max asked hesitantly. No, son. Mother speaks the truth, her father answered for her. I knew several cases when my acquaintances got the same fractures. Only they are all on disability and cannot move around on their own. So there's no hope, Max pleaded. We don't know. But you have to wait another week, replied his mother. Your father and I are not going to rush you. You love each other. We did. Abruptly, the son interrupted the conversation and went to his room. With a wry smile, Anne thought to herself that he seemed ripe to leave her. The son had said exactly the words she and her husband had been waiting for all this time. The moment had come when it was necessary to use all means to permanently alienate Helga from Max, and the first thing Anne did was to negotiate with the doctor and pay him a substantial sum so that he would not work too hard with the treatment. She didn't want the sick woman to get back on her feet and her son to marry her. Unaware of what was going on behind her back, Helga continued to believe the doctors, who only pretended to treat her. And only one person wouldn't leave her for a moment. That person was Mary. She had taken an indefinite leave of absence from work and almost slept in the room with Helga. Her friend and comrade in arms had not given up hope that she would soon be able to walk again. As for Max, Mary had made her own conclusions about him. True, she did not dare to speak about them yet, not to traumatize her psyche even more. In the meantime, days passed, but the improvement that the doctor promised was not coming. And no matter how much Helga prayed to God, nothing miraculous happened. She still had to move around in a wheelchair. Mary was by her side and actually took care of her as if she were a small child. There were days when she wanted to howl, but she held back and understood that this would not help her and that she had to get on with her life. Every day passed in the same tones. The only thing that changed was the nursing staff. Soon a consultation was held where the medical committee rendered a harsh verdict. Helga could no longer walk. It was a verdict that irrevocably sealed her future. Max also became aware of this, and he completely abandoned not only the relationship, but also from any communication with Helga. You could say that the banker, he openly told her, "It's over between us. Forget it." Barely able to contain herself so as not to go mad or make trouble, Helga withdrew. She stopped talking, not only to the doctors, but even to Mary. And to all questions she answered either with a nod of the head if she agreed, or on the contrary, a hand gesture if she refused. She never found out that it was the failed mother-in-law who had arranged her future. Interestingly, Anne did not even react when her son informed her of the doctor's verdict. On the contrary, she rubbed her hands together happily, her eyes sparkling, and that sparkle caused even her husband to feel a sense of dread. He suddenly thought that if something like this happened to him, no one would feel sorry for him either. Just the next day, Andrew made an appointment for a full examination at a private clinic. He wanted to know if he was okay, and if not, what to expect in the near future. Depressed. Helga could stare at the same point for hours. She would even sometimes refuse food if she had no appetite, and only Mary could hardly manage to feed her friend. If it were not for her efforts, Helga would have faded long ago, and no medicine could have brought her back to normal. At night she cried silently without any wailing. She just sobbed, burying herself in her pillow. Mary sat on a chair and stroked her head. 2 weeks later, Helga was discharged. The doctor provided recommendations and sent her home. He also prepared the documents for disability. Mary took it upon herself to arrange it so that her friend could rest in peace from the hospital atmosphere. But even at home, she did not change. She remained silent, occasionally making notes in her notebook. What was in it, however, Mary did not know. She was not in the habit of reading other people's correspondence, even if it was from a close friend. For psychological therapy, she began to take Helga out in a wheelchair to the park. There, in her opinion, was a different, soothing atmosphere, and she could create just the right background that would have a positive effect on Olya's mood. Little by little, she did begin to talk, but more and more she asked about Max, to which Mary answered her, "Forget about him, he's in the past." "But how? We were going to be married, weren't we?" Helga said dreamily, and at the same time raised her head up and looked at the clouds. "We did, we even wanted to." At any rate, he cut the subject short abruptly. Mary tried to divert her attention to something more pleasant. "Better look at how pretty the swans are on the pond today." "They are, and I somehow did not even notice them." With a smile on her face, answered Helga. Mary frowned her eyebrows and thought to herself, "Of course, when were you supposed to look at swans if you couldn't take your eyes off that traitor?" There was no other word she could use to call him. In fact, he did betray Helga. After she was discharged, he didn't even call. Although he was not expected to be heard from anyway, there was still hope that he would condescend and show himself. But no, the banker seemed to have disappeared. He did not answer the phone, even though he rarely called. And in the bank he did not appear much at all. It seems that on his mother's advice, he decided to sit out of town, in the house where he planned to live with Helga after the wedding. But it just so happened that the estate was now his, and in the meantime, to keep the investors from scattering and the whole business from collapsing, his father took over all the reins. Andrew had been in similar situations many times and knew how to get out of them. That's why he was in charge of the bank for so long. In his hands were concentrated all the threads of interaction with rich clients. Another week passed, and Helga calmed down. She was no longer silent and willingly communicated with Mary. They could, for example, discuss a particular dress. I was in the middle of a conversation with a woman with a disability, and the other was modest and didn't like flashy outfits. They just had to talk about something, so they found mundane, non-committal topics. They liked it. They could laugh heartily. Not only that, they had a little disco party in the apartment, but no dancing. It was possible to say that Helga believed in herself and stopped thinking about negativity. She had a desire to live and develop. At some point, she even wanted to go back to medicine, but did not know in what capacity because she could no longer fully serve patients. Mary promised to help so that her friend would not feel alone. "I will go back to work in a few days. I'll talk to the head doctor. I hope he'll think of something." "I can't wait. I'm sick of sitting in these four walls." "Be patient for a while. You and I already have come a long way," reassured her friend. "By the way, and you yourself can leave the apartment. I'll study. You won't quit your job because of me." "Not quite sure," answered Helga. "Well, if anything, I'll ask my neighbor to help me downstairs." The neighbor was an appliance repairman named Bruno. He worked through pre-orders and was often at home. He was 50 years old, divorced his wife 5 years ago, but his kids still visited him, no matter what. They made no distinction between their parents and loved them equally. Mari and Helga knew this even before the accident, and when they had time, they came to him and helped him clean up. And he repaired their appliances for free, sometimes bringing them something from the former owners. And the girls didn't have to buy it at the store. Mary worked with peace of mind. Helga, meanwhile, was learning to ride the wheelchair herself without anyone else's help. Except it was still hard for her to go downstairs. The very same neighbor stepped in and helped Helga out into the street. There she stood, as usual, for a few minutes, looking at the clouds in the sky, and then, pushing her wheels forward, she headed for the park. After all, this was the place where no one would stop her from reflecting on life. But suddenly, without even believing her eyes, she saw Max, his mother, and some girl. The three of them were standing on the bridge, talking about something. His father was strolling along the alley as if he had not been invited to the conversation on purpose. Helga tried to get a good look at the girl, but she could not do it without getting closer, and she did not want to risk discovering herself either. So she sat in her baby carriage near one of the benches, which the trees blocked from view. Soon the trio left the bridge and headed for the exit of the park. Andrew walked beside them, looking around, and then he met Helga's gaze quite by accident. She thought he would not see her, but the banker was sharp-eyed. He stared into her eyes for a few seconds and then smiled and walked on. It was at that moment that Helga read despair in his gaze. It seemed that he was at that edge when it was too late to go back, and conscience would not let him go forward. Helga remembered that day as the most memorable of her life, and not just because she saw her ex-fiancé and his new girlfriend. She saved the life of a little kitten, and it happened near a garbage can where the poor animal was cornered by street dogs. They barked at him and tried to pull him out, but the kitten resisted, snorting at the dogs and waving his paws. He looked only a few months old, but he was fighting so fiercely for his life that Helga remembered herself in his situation and rushed to help. Waving her arms, she shouted menacingly, and the dogs were so impudent that they rushed to flee. The kitten pressed even harder against the trash can and kept hissing. He wouldn't calm down until Helga took him in her arms. Only then did the little one purr, and humorlessly with its paws. It looked like it smelled food in her palms. Helga had eaten the pies she and her friend had fried just before the trip to the park. Unfortunately, she didn't have anything with her. And then Helga decided to take it home and feed it there. The kitten did not break away, although it looked around. Apparently, he was afraid that the dogs will appear again and threaten him. But being in safety when Helga brought him into the kitchen, he calmed down and stopped twisting his face. I even had to put him on a chair for his own comfort. Opening the refrigerator, Helga took out a bottle of milk and poured it into a porcelain bowl. After sniffing the treat a couple of times, the kitten lowered his muzzle and began to elbow the milk. Helga looked at him and realized that she was in the same position now. She too was being cared for, fed, washed. It was good that Mary was not just a childhood friend, but the closest thing she had to one. The kitten drank the treats and turned to her left side. Helga noticed a small scratch on his body that was bleeding. Apparently, the dogs had managed to snag it with their sharp claws or fangs after all. Right in the drawer of the kitchen table was the first aid kit. Helga pulled out bandages, antiseptic and absorbent cotton. I even had to take the baby into the bathroom and bathe him to clean the wound. Not only that, because he was fluffy, it was also necessary to cut off some of the hair. What is interesting, the kitten did not even resist, but on the contrary, obediently endured all the manipulations that Helga made on him. She treated the wound and made a bandage to prevent him from getting an infection in it. The bandage didn't restrict his movements, and the kitten jumped out of her arms and explored his new home. Putting the first aid kit back away, Helga decided to play with it for a while. She took a string, tied a piece of paper to it, and began to wave. The baby reacted instantly and started running after the bait. At that moment, his little collar flew off his neck and rolled under the couch. Helga did not see it right away because the thick fur covered everything. And then, probably from the jolting, he fell out. She could not bend over and lift the collar, so she had to wait for Mary and at the same time play with the kitten so that he inadvertently did not drag him further away. After half an hour, Mary came and saw the following picture. Helga laughed loudly and waved from side to side with a string of paper, forced the kitten to run after her. Abruptly exhaling, she stepped closer and said, "And I made a deal with the doctor." "Really?" Helga exclaimed, stopping her playing with the kitten. "Yes," replied Mary with a smile on her face. "He agreed to take you to the archive. There are so many documents and references there that nobody wants to deal with them. I wonder whose kitten is that." "Thank you for helping me," she thanked him. "I'll be sure to take it all out there. And this is from the street. He was hiding from angry dog." "I see. Well, he can keep it," Mary said. "Wait a minute. I need your help," Helga said, taking her hand. The collar flew off and rolled under the couch. "Get it, please, in case it has important information." Mary got down on one knee, peeked under the couch, and pulled out a small collar. Inside it was indeed inscribed, saying them to herself. She looked at her friend and said aloud, "Here is the kitten's name and phone number." "Let me see," Helga answered and took the collar from her hand. As it turned out, the baby's name was Fluffy, which in principle, given his thick white fur, was a perfect match. Looking at him, Helga almost cried. After all, it turned out that the kitten had an owner there, and the phone was easy to read. Mary got up from her lap and took the collar back. "Should we call? What if the owner is looking for him?" "Listen," Helga began, and her friend understood at once. "Let him stay with us for now. We will cure him and then give him away. Well, not to return the kitten with wound." "All right, if you want so," agreed with her Mary. "But don't delay, or I know you'll get used to it, and then you won't want to let it go." "Did you mean Max?" Helga grumbled unhappily. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. But he was your kitten too, you might say," Mary answered with a nod of her head. "You looked after him too. You looked after him too. You loved him blindly, and he ended up leaving you." "Yes, you're right. I was stupid to believe him," said Helga. "But we're talking about a real kitten now, and you know animals aren't capable of betrayal." "Yes. That's the difference from humans," Mary summed up. Together they cooked dinner and fed the found kitty. Fluffy seemed pleased that he was being taken care of so well. At the same time, he was constantly sniffing something, as if he was looking for someone, and it was hard not to guess that he was trying to find familiar places and smells. Looking at all this, the girl inwardly shamed herself for her weak character. She should have agreed and immediately called the number on her collar, but something stopped her, as if prompting her. Not yet time. For several days, the kitten stayed with her friends. He even got used to the new litter box by the door. It turned out that the pet had forgotten his real master, and Helga could safely settle down and continue to keep him at home. But no, her conscience still haunted her. She wondered when she would call and bring joy to the man who had lost his baby. At the same time, she still had one single question. How did it happen that the pet ran away? Helga even imagined that the real owner had deliberately gotten rid of the kitten. Well, why did he leave the collar then? All in all, different thoughts went through her head, and Helga didn't know which one was the right one. She did not dare to consult Mary because she would have offered to give the kitten to its rightful owner, and then she would have had to agree. Helga was expecting something, and she herself noticed that she was beginning to get used to him. A few more days and she would finally convince herself to keep the kitten. That day, which was Saturday, Helga woke up earlier than usual. Even Mary was still asleep. But when she heard a noise in the hall, she got out of bed and went out. Helga was lying on the couch, eyes wide open. "Good morning. Are you all right?" Mary asked. "Good morning to you too," said Helga. "I've just decided it's time to bring the kitten back. I had a dream this morning that you and I were playing in the orphanage yard, and we found a puppy in the orphanage yard, and we found a puppy in the bushes." "Yeah, I think I remember." "There was an incident," Mary answered thoughtfully, sitting down on the edge of the couch. "Well," Helga continued, "we wanted to take it back, but the teacher wouldn't let us. You said we should hide the puppies in the basement and bring them food." That's right. That's what happened. I just didn't remember right away," answered her friend with a smile. "And we walked around for days until we saw a boy looking for his puppy," Helga continued. "I so didn't want to part with him, but you talked me into giving the puppy away. I remember how I cried, but then, nothing, I calmed down." That's right. "Sleep gave you the right idea," Mary said as she stroked her head. "Let me help you up and drive to the bathroom while you clean yourself up, and I'll make breakfast." "Okay," answered Helga and went to the bathroom. Cooking eggs and sausage, Mary tried to go over and over that incident with the little puppy. And indeed, Helga had wanted to keep him then too. But an owner arrived just in time, and they had to give him back. On the other hand, it was a noble thing to do, and if they had left him on the street, he could have been hurt by larger dogs or even run over by a car, for example. At breakfast, they discussed a plan for how they would give the kitten away. Helga offered to call and then drive to the meeting. Mary, on the other hand, wanted to complete the transfer process at their home, but ended up adopting Helga's plan because she suddenly wanted to personally deliver the kitten to its rightful owner. Naturally, Mary couldn't refuse this either, remembering that incident with the little puppy. Helga dialed the numbers from the collar on her phone and waited for an answer. A man's voice was heard on the other end, and she was slightly confused. She first mumbled something and then gathered her thoughts and confidently said, "Hello, my name is Helga, and I found your kitten." There was an awkward pause, and only after a few seconds, a male voice answered, "Hello, me. And that's very good. I'm so glad that Fluffy is alive. You see, he ran away from the yard. When I drove the car, I forgot to close the door. That's it, the kitten's gone. I found him in the park. He fought off the dogs," continued Helga. "Oh my gosh, I live close to him. Nicholas was happy." "Is he all right?" "No, don't worry. I treated the wound and it was nothing dangerous," she reassured him. "Where are you?" "Shall I come over?" the landlord asked. "To be honest, I wanted to visit you," replied Helga. "Sure, no problem. Write down the address," said Nicholas, and dictated the street name and house number. It looked like he lived in the private sector, which made it easier to find. "Then I'll take a cab with my friend to your place," as she added. "Okay, I'll pay for the car," Nicholas told her. An hour later, they were there. The driver drove them to a fancy house. Looking at the house, Mary whistled and said loudly, "It looks like a man richer than your Max lives here." "It's not mine. It's all in the past," and Helga responded grudgingly. and you shouldn't judge a man by his dwelling. Maybe he's modest and kind, and he lives in a house like this because he likes space. Who's to say? All right, let's go, laughed her friend, pushing the stroller with Helga ahead of her. As she got closer, she saw a small video camera with a microphone above the door at head level. It was probably the one through which the master was to be summoned. Mary reached for the small white button and pressed it. A melody from some familiar song rang out. Then Nicholas' face appeared on the screen. He answered that it was okay to enter. There were no dogs, and the guards had been warned. But when he saw that one of the girls was in a wheelchair, he asked her to wait. After a few minutes, the door opened, and Nicholas appeared in person. He was quite tall and young for his age. From a distance, it seemed as if he was not in his 50s, but in his 30s. In any case, he took good care of his appearance and did not let himself go. Well, you didn't tell me one of you was getting around in a wheelchair. Putting his palms together, the landlord said. Just a minute. I'll just give the driver the money and be right back. After handing the cab driver a few bills, Nicholas returned and rolled the stroller with Helga into the courtyard himself. The guards had indeed been warned because they stood a little to the side and behaved quietly. However, when the owner of the house rolled Helga up to the porch, they immediately came abruptly and carried her into the house themselves in their arms. Soon the whole trio was sitting in the large, spacious hall near the fireplace. Helga let out the kitten she was holding under her blouse. Satisfied, he ran around and happily explored every corner. Now he was at home. Looking at his pet, Nicholas said sadly, "My granddaughter gave him to me when my wife died. You know what it's like to lose loved ones. And now I've lost a pet I'd grown accustomed to." "We understand," the friend said in one voice. "We grew up in an orphanage ourselves and never saw our parents." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. The owner of the house said, but thank you for the kitten. I'll take better care of him now. Should I give you some money? You did such a good deed, didn't you?" "No, we did it from the heart." "Not everything is measured in money," answered Helga. "Sometimes a helping hand is enough." Rolling the stroller away from the fireplace, her friend whispered softly, "What are you doing? He is a rich man. Why are you refusing?" "I did not save the kitten for money," she said. "Just look how fondly he spoke of him. What if we had a missing pet like that?" "Okay. But keep in mind that every penny counts," Mary agreed, but scolded her a little. She was surprised that her friend would give up money so easily. After all, they had so longed for her to get back on her feet as soon as possible, and even if it were only a fraction of the amount needed, it would have helped already. However, she flatly refused the money, turning to him. She repeated once more, "You don't need anything. The kitten went to you, came back, and that is the main thing." "Strange, of course, that you did not take the money," Nicholas said. "I look at you and feel as if I see a familiar face. I wonder, and who do I remind you of?" With a smile on her face, she asked. "Someone from the past," the master of the house answered and asked her to lift her chin. Helga complied with his request, absolutely not understanding why he needed it. But as they say, rich people have their quirks. Nicholas stared at the heart-shaped birthmark. It was right around his neck. He sighed heavily and closed his eyes for a minute, but when he opened them again, his face turned pale. "My God, it can't be. What is going on? Can you explain?" the girl asked excitedly, already lowering her chin. After he had calmed down a little and drunk the water the guard had brought him, the master of the house told a story that made everyone uncomfortable. It turned out that Helga was very much like his fiancée, who had given birth to a child 25 years earlier and died in childbirth. And he was on the run at the time, hiding to keep himself alive. Business was always difficult, especially if it involved criminal circles that did nothing but take money away. As for the bride, she died of heavy bleeding. By rumors that reached him, she gave birth to a baby girl. The only thing was that her father never got to see the baby. While he was dealing with business problems, she was sent to an orphanage. Soon, there was a fire, and all documents were burned. The children survived, but they were placed in other orphanages. Eventually, when the business problems were resolved, it was too late. The trail of the little girl was cut off, especially since he was not officially her father, and naturally no one gave him information about her. He also told other no less interesting facts. It became clear that the man's guest was really his daughter. "Wow, what a twist," she reacted. "I understand that this is surprising to you," Nicholas continued, "but I don't think there's any doubt about our kinship." "Maybe so, but I am shocked," Helga answered. Mary did not interfere, knowing that right before her eyes, her friend's fate was being decided. Nicholas spoke so convincingly that they had no doubt that he was indeed her father. And Helga herself seemed to believe it, because the owner of the house had several other arguments to prove it. That was what put the final point in the matter. However, in order to have official documents on hand and to recognize paternity, the landlord persuaded the probable daughter to take a DNA test. She agreed, especially since all the cards had been dealt. The landlord was so convincing that she could call him Daddy right now. But Helga, knowing how important medical tests are, decided to wait for the official results. At the same time, she couldn't find herself and constantly tormented her friend with the question, what will it say in the envelope? Naturally, her friend couldn't know that, so she only reassured and encouraged her. All this time they were in a state of suspense. Meanwhile, without waiting for the results, as if he knew what they would show, the man began to help the girl. He sent guards to her with bags full of groceries. In addition, he paid for the medications the doctor prescribed. He also kept in touch with her and even came a couple of times to see how she was doing. It was obvious that he was worried and very nervous. He needed moral support, and he tried to find it in the girl. At last, the results of the examination came in. The millionaire took the envelope himself, but he did not open it at once. He went to the girl's house in person to do it in front of her. It was noon when the doorbell rang. Mary opened the door and saw a man on the threshold. "Come in. You have become like family to us." She spoke and led him into the kitchen. "It is quite possible that what you said is true," said the millionaire, and put an envelope on the table. "Here are the results. Let's have a look at it together." Mary wheeled the baby carriage with Helga, and they opened the envelope. But not 2 minutes later, all at once, lowered their heads. Helga was especially gloomy, for it turned out that she was not his daughter. A misfire had occurred, and no one could understand why this was so. After all, everyone was sure that the girl was related to the man. He had convinced her of that himself, and then it was a mistake. Could it be that the expertise was wrong? Rich personally called the medical center where they took the DNA samples. For a few minutes he argued with the chief specialist, until he was convinced that in this case the medicine was not wrong, and the girl really was not his daughter. Putting the phone in his pocket, he said sadly, "I was sure we were related." The girl was just as shocked. She hadn't expected the results would not confirm their kinship. During this time, she had so many plans for them in her head. I was not sure that the bitter truth was a severe blow to her spiritual self-consciousness. She was discouraged. However, the rich businessman decided to act to the end. He promised that he would solve all the problems with the treatment. A few days later, a medical car came to pick her up in person. Helga was taken to a private hospital where she was to prepare for surgery. The millionaire turned out to be a very good and kind man, and even though he could not find his daughter, he still would not refuse to help. Mary again took leave to be near her again. They are like sisters, sharing both their lives and their personal happiness. While preparations for the operation were underway, Nicholas constantly consulted with the doctors. He wanted to be sure that everything would be successful and the girl would be able to walk again. Especially for her, the millionaire paid for the services of the most qualified doctors. It seems that he spared no money and helped from the bottom of his heart, and not for a fraction of what some greedy businessman did. These days, he never once questioned whether he needed all this and whether it was worth making such a fuss for some girl. No, he firmly believed he was doing a good deed. This time, they were placed in a large, spacious room. The clinic provided all kinds of care for its patients. The man offered a personal nurse, but the patient's friend refused, saying that she herself is a physician by training. The day of the surgery came. It lasted several hours. Meanwhile, the businessman, in his office on the 20th floor of the business center, crossed his fingers and prayed to God that everything went well. He said the girl's name to himself as he prayed for forgiveness. Soon he received a call that the surgery was over and Helga had survived it well, but there was a need for a blood transfusion. He immediately responded, saying he was willing to donate his own blood. A friend made the same decision. They were offered to take tests to find a suitable donor. A few hours later, the man was already sitting in the doctor's office doing a compatibility test. Across the wall, Mary was undergoing a similar procedure. She had no doubt that her blood would be a match, since they had grown up as soulmates since childhood. However, the test showed that neither blood was a match. The rich man immediately engaged all his connections to urgently find a donor. And while they were looking for him, the head doctor of the clinic secretly told the businessman that he and Mary have a rare blood type. The businessman didn't believe it. "No way. Weren't you mistaken? It already happened once." "I can assure you that, in this case, the blood type is the same," said the head doctor. "And what does that mean?" the businessman asked. "That you should take a DNA test and compare it with the girl's samples. Do you agree?" "Yes, we will definitely do an examination," agreed Nicholas. "But you do not forget about Helga. She needs a transfusion. Don't worry. A donor has already been found," the doctor replied. "In a couple of hours, 3 at the most, we will have finished all the procedures." Mary was told this unexpected news, and she agreed to give her DNA samples. Again, they went back to having to wait for the results. In the meantime, the transfusions helped, and soon the girl was on the mend. Mary told her that their rare blood types were the same. Helga took the news calmly and wished her friend good luck. The businessman plunged back into the unknown. He was already afraid of jinxing, so he kept silent. Is it a joke to check the relationship for the second time recently? Naturally, his nerves were on edge, and he simply did not know what else to expect. In general, it was unclear whether it was coincidence or fate finally smiled on him, but we could say that the search was over and his daughter was found. Soon the results came, which were to put an end to the case of determination of kinship. He opened the envelope in front of them and breathed a sigh of relief. So that. He hugged Mary and cried with joy. Helga looked at them and was glad that her daughter and her father were reunited, and though it took many trials, it was worth it, at least for Mary, because it was true that fate had always thrown her into twists and turns and steep bumps. On the other hand, they had overcome them together, which meant that they had to keep going down the same road. The man, after all the paperwork had been taken care of, moved Helga into their home at her own daughter's request. As she herself explained, "I can't live without my sister," and even though they had different blood, in spirit they were one. The businessman paid for the girl's full rehabilitation. He did everything he could to make her walk, and it happened at the most unexpected moment when they were eating breakfast together in the morning. Without any support, She got up from her wheelchair and slowly began to move her legs. It was her first tentative steps, but much more significant than any other event in her life. After another checkup, the doctors assured her that she would soon be able to walk properly. A few more weeks passed, and her motor functions were almost restored. Meanwhile, in the meantime, her friend managed to meet a guy and start a serious relationship with him. They liked each other and were already thinking of getting married. However, her father insisted that his daughter not rush into it. He had nothing against her boyfriend, but he didn't want to see her suffer later if things broke up between them. So he suggested they test their feelings, get used to each other, and plan their future in peace. As for Max, he soon went bankrupt, became addicted to gambling, and spent all his money there. It got to the point that he also ran his hands into bank deposits. But the machinations were quickly uncovered, and even his father did not help him avoid criminal responsibility. Andrew did not save his son, and after a while his wife left him. We can say that his torment was over, even if he had to give part of the jointly acquired property to the insidious Anne. And this he still did with little blood, and she and her son could have let him go into the world.